For decades, neuroscience assumed that an itch was mild pain, a low-intensity activation of pain-sensing nerve fibers, weak enough to annoy but not strong enough to hurt. Scratching, under this model, worked by replacing the mild pain of the itch with the sharper pain of the scratch, overriding a weak signal with a strong one. The model was clean. The model was wrong. In 1997, a finding published in Nature by Schmeltz and colleagues identified a population of nerve fibers in human skin whose sole function is to transmit itch, not pain fibers firing weakly. A separate population with different receptor profiles, different targets in the spinal cord, different ascending pathways to the brain. Your nervous system has a dedicated sensory channel for itch, running parallel to pain but independent of it, wired through its own spinal cord relay neurons, producing its own distinct conscious sensation. Pain and itch share a body, they do not share a circuit. And this separate circuit has a design flaw that makes it almost impossible to satisfy because the action it compels you to perform is the action that makes it worse. Itch-specific nerve endings sit in the upper layers of your skin. They are slow-conducting, unmyelinated fibers, the thinnest wiring your nervous system uses, carrying signals at roughly 1 meter per second compared to the 80 meters per second of the fast-touch fibers that let you feel a tap on your shoulder. The slowness is why an itch builds gradually rather than arriving all at once. The signal propagates to your spinal cord at walking speed. These fibers respond to a specific set of chemical triggers. Histamine released by immune cells in your skin when tissue is disturbed or when an allergen is detected is the most studied trigger. A mosquito bite injects saliva. Your immune cells respond by releasing histamine into the surrounding tissue. The histamine binds to receptors on the itch fibers. The fibers fire. The signal travels to the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, the itch signal synapses on a dedicated population of relay neurons, neurons that respond to itch signals and not to pain signals. The independence was demonstrated when Sun and colleagues selectively destroyed these relay neurons in mice. The mice stopped scratching in response to itch-producing chemicals. Their pain responses remained completely intact. The two systems, itch and pain, use separate relay neurons in the spinal cord. Eliminating the itch relay did not affect the pain relay. The independence is structural. From the spinal cord, the itch signal ascends to the brain through a pathway that reaches 3 destinations simultaneously. The region that maps where on your body the itch is located, the region that generates the subjective unpleasantness, the urge, the compulsion, the I must scratch this, and the motor planning region that initiates the scratch. The entire pathway, from skin to location to urge to action, is a dedicated circuit for itch alone. Scratch works. For approximately 3 to 5 seconds, when your fingernails rake across the itchy skin, they stimulate pain-sensing nerve fibers, the ones the itch fibers are independent from. The pain signal activates inhibitory neurons in the spinal cord that temporarily suppress the itch signal. This is gate control, the principle that one sensory signal can suppress another at the spinal level. Rubbing a bumped elbow uses gate control. Running cold water over a burn uses gate control. Scratching an itch uses gate control. The pain from the scratch closes the gate on the itch. The itch disappears. Then the gate reopens, and the itch returns, often stronger than before. Reason is the design flaw at the center of the loop. Scratching mechanically disrupts cells in the scratch skin, immune cells called mast cells that contain granules of histamine. When your fingernails drag across skin, they rupture mast cell membranes. The ruptured mast cells release their histamine into the surrounding tissue. Fresh histamine activates more itch fibers. More itch signal reaches the spinal cord. The gate control suppression from the scratch fades within seconds. The new, amplified itch signal breaks through. Scratch itch cycle is a positive feedback loop. Itch produces scratch. Scratch produces brief relief through gate control. Scratch simultaneously produces more histamine through mast cell disruption. More histamine produces more itch. More itch produces more scratch. Each cycle amplifies the signal. The loop cannot be broken by scratching because scratching is the amplifier. The only way to break the loop is to not scratch, allowing the histamine to dissipate without mechanical disruption of additional immune cells. But the part of your brain that generates the urge does not accept this logic, and the urge it generates is not ordinary. Brain imaging studies show that the activation pattern during itch overlaps with the activation pattern during addiction. Craving, the neural territory that produces compulsive drug seeking, also produces compulsive scratching. The itch urge is neurologically compulsive. It activates circuitry that makes behaviors resistant to voluntary suppression. The comparison to addiction is not metaphorical. The circuits overlap. Motor response to the urge is faster than deliberation. The interval between itch sensation and scratch initiation is approximately 200 to 400 milliseconds, shorter than the typical reaction time for voluntary, considered actions. You scratch before you decide to scratch. The motor system initiates the scratch in response to the urge with minimal input from the prefrontal regions that would evaluate whether scratching is a good idea. By the time you think, "I shouldn't scratch this," your hand has already arrived. The scratch is a semi-reflex faster than thought, driven by the compulsion circuitry rather than the decision-making circuitry. And the scratch is rewarded. This is where the loop becomes nearly unbreakable. A finding published by Mochizuki and colleagues using brain imaging showed that scratching an itchy area activates the reward circuitry in the brain, the regions that process pleasure. The pleasure of scratching is a distinct signal, separate from the relief of itch cessation. Two reinforcement signals arrive simultaneously. The itch is temporarily gone, relief the removal of something unpleasant, and the scratch felt good, pleasure the arrival of something pleasant. Two independent reinforcement pathways driving one behavior. The loop is doubly reinforced, once by negative reinforcement, escaping the itch, and once by positive reinforcement, enjoying the scratch. No other sensory loop in the body carries double reinforcement for a behavior that amplifies the stimulus it responds to. That double reinforcement, relief and pleasure arriving simultaneously for a behavior that makes the underlying signal worse on every cycle, is unique in the body. No other sensory loop carries both forms of reinforcement for a behavior that amplifies the signal it responds to. Loop has a spatial precision that reveals something about how accurately your brain maps your body surface. Scratching the wrong location does not relieve the itch. If the itch is on the back of your left hand and you scratch a centimeter to the right, the gate control suppression reaches the wrong spinal relay neurons, the neurons processing the adjacent skin, not the neurons processing the itchy skin. The itch persists. You must scratch the exact location. The precision requirement means your brain's map of the body surface is detailed enough to distinguish between adjacent patches of skin, separated by millimeters, and the itch pathway is routed through relay neurons that are spatially specific enough that a misaligned scratch has no effect. You have experienced this hunting for the exact spot on your back, guiding someone else's hand to the precise location because a little to the left was not close enough. The frustration of the misaligned scratch is the frustration of a spatially precise system receiving spatially imprecise input. Your brain knows exactly where the itch is. Your hand cannot always reach exactly where the brain says it is. The back, the region most difficult to reach precisely, is the region where itch is most frustrating, not because the itch is stronger there, but because the spatial precision of the scratch is hardest to achieve. There is an observation about surrogate scratching that extends the spatial finding. Watching someone else scratch the location where you itch provides partial itch relief, not through gate control, because no mechanical stimulus has reached your skin, but through the mirror system activating the motor simulation of scratching at the correct body map location. The brain's simulation of the scratch partially activates the inhibitory spinal pathway. The relief is weaker than actual scratching, but measurably stronger than watching someone scratch a different location. Your body map processes the observed scratch as though it were happening on your skin, and the simulation provides a partial gate. Loop explains acute itch, the mosquito bite, the allergic reaction, the brush against a stinging plant, but the loop operates on a longer time scale in chronic itch conditions, and what happens to the spinal cord during months of continuous scratching reveals something about how your nervous system rewires itself in response to persistent signals. In chronic itch conditions, eczema, psoriasis, kidney disease, neuropathic itch, the scratch-itch loop runs continuously for months or years. The spinal cord adapts. The relay neurons that process itch signals become hyperexcitable. They begin firing in response to stimuli that would not normally produce itch. Light touch becomes itchy. Warmth becomes itchy. The contact of clothing against skin becomes itchy. The itch threshold drops. Normal sensory input that previously passed through the spinal cord without triggering the itch relay now triggers it. The condition is called allokinesis itch, from stimuli that should not produce itch, and it parallels the chronic pain phenomenon where light touch produces pain in sensitized tissue. Spinal rewiring is accompanied by cortical reorganization. Your brain maintains a map of your entire body's surface, a topographic representation where each area of skin corresponds to a specific region of cortex. In chronic itch, the cortical territory devoted to the affected skin area expands. The brain allocates more processing power to the itchy region, which amplifies the conscious experience of itch from that area. The expansion is measurable. The cortical representation of a chronically itchy forearm is larger than the representation of the matching area on the unaffected arm. More cortex means more signal processing. More signal processing means more intense itch experience. The brain is literally devoting more of itself to making the itch louder. Breaking chronic itch requires addressing both ends, the peripheral sensitization in the skin and spinal cord, and the central amplification in the cortex. This is why chronic itch is resistant to antihistamines alone. Antihistamines block the histamine trigger at the skin level but do not reverse the spinal sensitization or the cortical expansion. The itch has been burned into the wiring at multiple levels of the nervous system. Silencing the original signal is not enough when the relay stations have been permanently turned up. If you are over 45, you may have noticed that your skin itches more than it did at 20, particularly in winter, particularly on the shins and forearms, particularly in the evening. The change is not imagined. Aging skin produces less sebum, the oily secretion that maintains the skin barrier. The drier skin allows more water to evaporate from the upper layers, which exposes the itch-specific nerve endings to direct stimulation. The nerve endings sit closer to the surface in older skin because the upper skin layers thin with age. The combination drier surface, thinner barrier, exposed nerve endings lowers the itch threshold. Stimuli that would not have produced itch at 30 produce itch at 55 because the physical distance between the trigger and the nerve ending has decreased. Clinical term is senile pruritus, age-related itch without identifiable skin disease. It affects a substantial proportion of the population over 60. The condition is undertreated because many people assume the itching is normal aging rather than a specific physiological change with a specific mechanism. The mechanism is structural: thinner skin, less oil, exposed fibers, not psychological. Moisturizing, replacing the sebum barrier that age has reduced, addresses the peripheral cause directly. The itch fibers are still functional. The spinal cord relay is still intact. The barrier between the fibers and the environment has thinned. Restoring the barrier reduces the itch without any intervention at the spinal or cortical level. There is a phenomenon that proves the itch can be generated entirely without skin, and the proof comes from people who no longer have the skin where the itch appears. Amputees report itching in the missing limb, an itch in a hand, a foot, a shin that was removed months or years ago. The itch is vivid. The urge to scratch is compelling. The location is specific, not a vague sense of discomfort, but a localized itch on a particular part of a limb that does not exist. The experience proves that the body map in the cortex can generate itch independently of any signal from the skin. The map persists after the territory it represents has been removed. The itch is generated by the map, not by the skin. The phantom itch demonstrates something about your brain that extends beyond itch. Your brain does not experience your body directly. It experiences a model of your body that it maintains in the cortex. The model is updated by signals from the skin, but it can run without those signals. When the limb is removed, the model does not delete the corresponding territory. The territory remains, and the cortex can generate any sensation the territory normally supports, including itch, including pain, including the experience of movement in fingers that are no longer there. The body you feel is the body your brain believes you have, not necessarily the body you actually have, and the map is more persistent than the territory. Consciousness discussion described this model as a broadcast summary. The itch reveals something the broadcast model does not. The model can generate specific, locatable, compelling sensation at a named site on the body without any signal arriving from that site. The summary can itch. That finding phantom itch, proving the cortical body map generates sensation, independently of the skin it represents. The map outlasting the territory by months or years is the strongest evidence that the itch was never in the skin. Here is where the itch reveals something about social neuroscience that no other sensation demonstrates as directly, because you are probably itching right now. Reading about itch produces itch. Watching someone scratch produces itch. Hearing a description of insects on skin produces itch. The contagion is real, not imagined. Brain imaging by Holle and colleagues confirmed the contagion. Watching videos of people scratching activated the itch processing regions in the observer's brain: the urge center, the body surface map, the motor planning area. The observer was not being touched. No histamine was being released in their skin. The itch was generated entirely by the visual system, activating the body map from the cortical end, a top-down itch, triggered by seeing someone else's scratch and simulating the corresponding sensation on your own body's map. Contagion varies in strength across individuals. People who score higher on neuroticism and on empathic concern experience stronger visual itch contagion. Their body maps are more responsive to the observed behavior of others. The variation is consistent across studies and suggests that the body map's susceptibility to social input is a personality-linked trait, not a universal constant. Contagion extends beyond vision to sound. The distinctive sound of fingernails scratching skin, a specific high-frequency scraping pattern, activates the itch pathway in listeners even when no visual information is available. You have experienced this. Hearing someone scratch vigorously in a quiet room produces itch on your own skin. The auditory system recognizes the spectral signature of scratching and routes the signal to the body map, which generates itch at a location selected by the listener's cortex rather than by any peripheral stimulus. The selection is not random. The itch tends to appear at locations where the listener has recently experienced itch, or at locations of chronic sensitivity. The body map, when activated by auditory contagion, defaults to its own history of itch rather than mapping to the location of the observed scratch. The sound provides the trigger. The map provides the location from its own memory. Evolutionary logic is direct. In social primates, itch often signals parasites. If one group member scratches, indicating a flea, a tick, a mite, a preemptive itch response in observers triggers grooming behavior that may detect and remove parasites before they establish. The contagious itch is a group hygiene system. The visual detection of one member's scratching triggers the itch-scratch-groom sequence in others as a preventive measure. You are itching right now because your mirror system detected descriptions of itch in what you are hearing and activated your body map's itch response as though parasites might be present. The system does not distinguish between real parasites and descriptions of parasites. It fires on the signal, not the source. Grooming remnant persists in human social behavior. Parents instinctively inspect a child's scalp when the child scratches their head. Partners check each other's backs when one complains of itch. The inspection is not deliberated. It is the primate grooming response triggered by the visual contagion of another person's scratching. The itch was the signal. The scratch was the broadcast. The inspection was the response. The broadcast was designed to recruit. The system works across species, across cultures, and across the gap between a genuine parasite and a sentence about one. One dimension that makes the itch distinct from every other sensory experience. Itch cannot be anticipated without being produced. You can anticipate pain. Imagine a needle approaching your skin without reliably feeling pain at the imagined site. Itch collapses this distinction. Thinking about itch produces itch. Imagining a spider on your arm produces itch where the imagined spider sits. The body map cannot represent the possibility of itch without generating the sensation itself. Anticipation and experience use one cortical pathway, and the pathway does not distinguish between a real pruritogen in the skin and an imagined one in the model. This collapse of anticipation and experience explains why itch is so difficult to study in laboratory settings. Subjects who know they are participating in an itch study begin itching before any stimulus is applied. It explains why reading about itch has produced sensations on your skin that were not there 10 minutes ago. And it explains why the advice "try not to think about the itch" is neurologically impossible. Attempting to not think about the itch requires representing the itch in the cortex, which generates the itch. Nocebo studies have demonstrated the collapse directly. Subjects told they will be exposed to an itch-producing substance, but given an inert placebo instead report itch at the application site. The itch is real. The brain imaging confirms it, the itch processing regions activate, the urge center fires, the scratch motor planning initiates. The expectation produced the itch without any chemical trigger. The body map generated the sensation from a verbal prediction about what would happen to the skin. No histamine, no mast cells, no pruritogen. The map itched because it was told it would itch. The gap between what the skin received, nothing, and what the brain produced, itch, is the gap between your body and your brain's model of your body. The model generates experience. The skin provides data that updates the model, but the model does not require the data to produce the experience. If you have noticed that itching intensifies at bedtime, that the moment you lie down and the lights go out, the itching that was manageable during the day becomes insistent, the mechanism is not psychological. During the day, your brain is processing competing sensory inputs: visual, auditory, motor, social. The itch signal competes for conscious attention against all of these inputs and often loses. At bedtime, competing inputs withdraw. The visual stream goes dark, the auditory environment quiets, motor activity ceases, social processing stops. The itch signal, which has been present all along, no longer competes against other sensory streams for access to conscious awareness. The itch gets louder not because the signal gets stronger, but because the competing signals get quieter. The gate that daytime sensory activity provided the partial suppression of itch by competing inputs closes when you lie down in the dark. Evening cortisol decline compounds the effect. Cortisol has anti-inflammatory properties. It suppresses histamine release and reduces immune cell activity. During the day, cortisol levels are higher, partially suppressing the peripheral itch trigger. At night, cortisol reaches its 24-hour low, removing the anti-inflammatory suppression. More histamine reaches the itch fibers. More itch signal reaches the spinal cord. The peripheral trigger intensifies at the precise moment that the central competition for attention withdraws. Both changes reduce competition and increase trigger converge at bedtime. The nighttime itch is the removal of two independent suppression systems simultaneously. There is one form of itch that serves a purpose, and the purpose is not to trigger scratching. When a wound is healing, the regenerating tissue releases histamine and other chemical signals as part of the repair process. The itch that accompanies a healing cut, a closing surgical incision, or a mending fracture site under a cast is the repair chemistry activating the itch fibers as a side effect of tissue regeneration. The itch is the sensory cost of repair, not a malfunction. The itch fibers responding to the histamine that the healing tissue produces as it rebuilds. Healing itch is the one case where the urge to scratch works against a beneficial process. Scratching a healing wound disrupts the new tissue, ruptures the mast cells involved in repair, and can reopen the injury. The itch is signaling that repair is proceeding. Scratching interrupts the repair. The compulsive urge, the craving level motor drive generated by the brain, works against the body's interests for the only time in the itch system. Every other itch, at least historically, served the purpose of removing an irritant. The healing itch drives removal of tissue the body is actively building. Anyone who has worn a cast knows the specific torment this produces. The fracture site heals. The repair chemistry releases histamine. The itch fires under plaster that cannot be reached. The craving level motor urge to scratch arrives with no available motor solution. The skin is encased. The fingers cannot reach. The urge has no outlet. Weeks of compulsive itch without the possibility of scratching. The experience is a natural demonstration of what the loop does when the feedback arm is physically blocked. The itch does not escalate because no scratching occurs to rupture mast cells and release fresh histamine. The itch persists from the repair chemistry alone but does not amplify. The cast, by preventing the scratch, prevents the loop. The frustration is real. The proof that not scratching prevents amplification is also real. If the loop is built into the circuit and scratching amplifies the signal, the question becomes what stops itch without feeding it. The physics provides two alternatives, both operating through gate control at the spinal level, neither triggering the mast cell disruption that amplifies the loop. Cold application activates cold sensing receptors in the skin, which inhibit the itch relay neurons through the spinal gating mechanism. Cold closes the itch gate through a sustained input that does not damage tissue and does not rupture immune cells. The cold suppresses the itch for as long as the cold is applied longer than the 3 to 5 second suppression from scratching. Menthol activates the cold receptors chemically. Menthol-containing creams produce the gating effect without actual temperature change. The cooling sensation is the gate control mechanism operating through pharmacology rather than physics, but the spinal suppression is identical. Gentle vibration or tapping activates touch-sensing nerve fibers that gate the itch pathway without the tissue damage scratching produces. No immune cell disruption, no histamine release, no amplification. The gate control suppression from vibration is functionally identical to the suppression from scratching, but without the feedback arm of the loop. You gate the itch without feeding it. The itch you are feeling right now on your scalp, your forearm, the side of your neck, wherever the reading has placed, it was generated by your cortical body map in response to a narrative about itch transmitted through language processed by your visual system. No histamine, no mast cells, no pruritogen touched your skin. The map produced the sensation from a description. An antihistamine would not help. There is no histamine to block. The itch is cortical, generated entirely by the model, and the model does not consult the skin before producing the sensation. The fact that the map can do this, that language can activate the itch pathway through the body model without any peripheral input, is the demonstration of how completely your conscious experience of your body is generated by the brain's model rather than by the body itself. The itch was never in your skin. The itch was in the map. The map is in your brain. The brain has been modeling a body it believes it has, and the model is detailed enough to itch on command from a sentence. That architecture, the map generating sensation from narrative, the body you feel constructed by a model that runs independently of the signals the skin actually sends, the itch, proving the model can produce experience without input, is the architecture that made the word itch point at the map, rather than the skin for me. The urge to scratch is one of the most compelling motor urges your nervous system produces, comparable to addictive craving in its neural signature, doubly reinforced by relief and pleasure, faster than deliberation, amplifying the signal it responds to on every cycle. The loop was built into the circuit from the beginning. The circuit is a window into the body, map your brain maintains, the gating mechanisms your spinal cord uses to manage competing signals, the reward circuits that reinforce behavior independent of outcome, and the mirror systems that spread sensation through vision alone. You have been scratching your entire life without knowing any of this. The itch was never the problem. The loop was the problem. And the loop was designed to be unbreakable.